In the early 1970s, NHRA officials were scrambling to slow down one man, Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins. His pro stock machines were so dominant that the rulebook kept changing just to keep him in check. But at the very same time, another superstar was tearing up drag strips across America, Don the Snake Prudhomme. And here's the strange part. While Jenkins kept running into rules, restrictions, and penalties, the Snake never seemed to face the same kind of storm. Same sanctioning body. Same era. Same sport. So why did one legend fight the rulebook, while the other somehow raced right past it? Today, we're uncovering the quiet structural advantage that may have protected Don Prudhomme and the hidden reason Grumpy Jenkins never had it. The rise of Grumpy Jenkins and the rulebook storm. By the early 1970s, the NHRA drag racing scene was alive with intensity. The sport was no longer just about raw speed. It had become a chess game of engineering brilliance, rules, and regulations. And at the center of this storm was Bill "Grumpy" Jenkins, a man whose mind worked faster than any engine he ever built. Jenkins wasn't content just to drive fast cars. He built them in a way that pushed every boundary of the NHRA pro stock rules. Every lightweight component, every clever engine tweak, every innovative aerodynamic adjustment was meticulously calculated. He didn't just race, he redefined what was possible in pro stock. Jenkins' cars started to dominate. And with each victory, the NHRA found itself scrambling. Officials were forced to introduce weight brake adjustments, engine parity regulations, and technical limitations, all in an attempt to keep the playing field fair. But for Grumpy, it felt like fighting a battle on two fronts, against other drivers on the track and against the ever-shifting rules off it. Every time he found an edge, the rulebook seemed to shift, as if anticipating his next move. The very innovations that made him legendary also made him a target. Fans loved his cars, engineers marveled at his ingenuity, but NHRA officials began to worry that his brilliance was destabilizing the class. And then there was Don, the Snake, Prudhomme. At first glance, he seemed like just another superstar, another driver cutting a path of dominance through drag strips across the country. But the more you look at his story, the more you see a completely different battlefield. Prudhomme was a master not only behind the wheel but in navigating the corporate and political landscape of drag racing. Sponsored by major manufacturers, backed by some of the best-funded teams in the country, he had an infrastructure around him that Grumpy could only dream of. Where Jenkins had to constantly adapt to the rules in pro stock, Prudhomme operated in funny car and top fuel classes where the NHRA's enforcement was less focused on technical minutiae and more on spectacle and safety. The difference was subtle but powerful. While Jenkins' brilliance was meticulously analyzed, measured, and occasionally penalized, Prudhomme's dominance rarely triggered the same scrutiny. Part of it was class structure. Funny car and top fuel had rules designed to ensure showmanship and crowd engagement, not necessarily to police every gram of engine weight or every tenth of a second. Part of it was influence. Prudhomme's connections with sponsors and manufacturers meant that his presence was vital for NHRA's growth. And part of it was pure timing. The sport was still evolving, and the NHRA had to balance fairness with the booming popularity of drag racing. This structural difference created a scenario that few outside the racing world noticed. Jenkins was constantly under the microscope, innovating at the edge of the rulebook and often paying the price. Prudhomme, meanwhile, operated in an environment where rules could bend around him rather than constrain him. It wasn't cheating. It wasn't favoritism in the scandalous sense. It was simply a different ecosystem within the same sport, where class, influence, and timing aligned to give one driver a subtle but crucial advantage. By now, you might be asking yourself, if both men were racing in the same era, how could such a disparity exist? The answer lies in the combination of engineering genius, political navigation, and structural loopholes. Jenkins was brilliant but boxed into a framework that punished his creativity. Prudhomme was brilliant too, but he raced in a structure designed to reward visibility, sponsorship, and crowd engagement, and in that system, the rulebook never quite caught up to him. In other words, the very architecture of NHRA racing created two parallel realities, one where Jenkins had to fight the rules just to win, and another where Prudhomme could race, win, and expand his legend largely unchallenged. And this is why, when you dig into the history of that era, you start to see the invisible advantage that allowed the Snake to escape what some historians quietly call Grumpy's legal fate. It's a subtle, almost invisible difference, but it shaped the careers of two of drag racing's greatest legends. And in the next section, we're going to look even closer at the loopholes, political maneuvering, and corporate influence that protected Don Prudhomme, revealing just how the NHRA rules of the time could be a weapon or a shield, depending on where you stood. The hidden advantage: how the snake escaped the storm. While Grumpy Jenkins was trapped under the constant microscope of NHRA scrutiny, Don, the snake, Prudhomme seemed untouchable. At first glance, it might have looked like pure luck, or perhaps just superior driving skill. But when you peel back the layers, you start to see the invisible threads that allowed him to escape what could have been a career-halting legal storm. The first piece of the puzzle was class structure. Jenkins was racing in pro stock, a category meticulously regulated for technical parity. Every pound of weight, every cubic inch of engine displacement, every minor modification was quantified, monitored, and, if necessary, penalized. NHRA's goal was to keep competition close and prevent any one driver from monopolizing wins. But this system had a side effect. It made creative engineers like Jenkins targets for the rulebook. Every time he innovated, officials adjusted the limits, sometimes even mid-season. It was a never-ending game of catch-up, and the stakes were enormous. Now, contrast that with Prudhomme. He was dominating the funny car and top fuel classes, where NHRA enforcement operated differently. Here, the rules emphasized safety and spectacle over technical minutiae. The sanctioning body cared less about the exact weight of a component or the tiniest engine tweak, and more about keeping fans excited and sponsors invested. Prudhomme's cars were fast, yes, but more importantly, he was part of a league that NHRA needed to promote. Every time he hit the strip, he drew crowds, sponsors, and television attention, and in the business-driven world of drag racing, that translated into influence. Which brings us to the second piece: corporate backing. Prudhomme wasn't just a driver, he was the face of well-funded racing programs, supported by manufacturers who had a vested interest in keeping him on the track. This support didn't just give him access to better technology, it also created a subtle layer of political protection. NHRA couldn't enforce certain penalties too aggressively without risking friction with sponsors and manufacturers, a risk Grumpy Jenkins never had to leverage in pro stock. Jenkins was an independent innovator, a brilliant mind often working without the kind of corporate shield that Prudhomme enjoyed. Finally, there was the structural loophole that few outsiders fully appreciated. It wasn't a loophole you could see in the rulebook or exploit with clever engineering. It was a byproduct of how the NHRA organized its classes, balanced enforcement, and weighed influence. The Snakes class had flexibility built in by design, a flexibility that allowed him to push limits without ever triggering the same kind of penalties that repeatedly challenged Jenkins. In essence, the same sport had two invisible tracks, one where ingenuity collided constantly with regulation, and another where strategic position, backing, and class structure created a protective bubble. And this bubble wasn't obvious at the time. Fans saw Prudhomme's dominance and assumed it was just skill. Rivals may have grumbled, but few understood the systemic advantage at work. Meanwhile, Jenkins was being throttled by the rules he had helped inspire, fighting battles both on the asphalt and in the NHRA office. The irony was cruel. The engineer who changed pro stock forever was the one constantly constrained, while the charismatic superstar in a parallel universe of the sport seemed to glide above it all. By the mid-1970s, the pattern was clear. Jenkins would continue to innovate, continue to challenge the limits, and continue to pay the price of his brilliance. Prudhomme would continue to win, continue to draw crowds, and continue to benefit from the rare alignment of talent, timing, and structural advantage. Two legends, intertwined in the same sport, but experiencing it in radically different ways. And the secret that allowed the Snake to escape what many fans assumed was inevitable: legal challenges, penalties, and scrutiny, lay not in luck, skill, or cheating, but in a perfect storm of structural design, influence, and strategic positioning. The stage was set, and in the next section, we'll dive even deeper into the specific moments and maneuvers where Prudhomme's advantage became undeniable, showing exactly how he raced past Grumpy Jenkins' fate and cemented a legacy that still echoes in drag racing today. The moments that made the Snake untouchable. By the mid-1970s, it had become obvious to insiders. Don Prudhomme was racing in a league of his own, not because the man behind the wheel was invincible, but because the system itself was subtly working in his favor. The NHRA, trying to balance fairness, promotion, and sponsorship, had inadvertently created a protective bubble around the superstar. While Grumpy Jenkins battled weight penalties, engine restrictions, and constant rulebook tweaks, Prudhomme's funny car and top fuel machines were allowed to push the envelope without triggering the same scrutiny. There were key moments that revealed just how untouchable he was. At certain national events, Jenkins' innovations were analyzed to the milligram, resulting in adjusted minimum weights and penalties that cost him valuable races. Meanwhile, Prudhomme's team could test radical fuel setups, experiment with chassis tweaks, and roll down the track knowing that the NHRA's enforcement in his class prioritized spectacle over technical enforcement. It wasn't favoritism, it was structural leverage amplified by corporate sponsorship and the sheer draw of Prudhomme's name. Even when rule ambiguities arose, Prudhomme's team had the resources and connections to navigate them quietly. A misinterpreted regulation here, a technical loophole there, every time, he remained on the safe side of enforcement. The contrast could not have been starker. Jenkins' brilliance repeatedly triggered penalties, while Prudhomme's dominance was often untouched. It was as if the NHRA itself had divided the battlefield, unknowingly shielding one while challenging the other. This invisible advantage created tension not only between the drivers but also within the sport itself. Fans cheered, but few realized the hidden forces shaping the outcomes. Jenkins' frustration was palpable. Prudhomme's legacy grew, layer by layer, fueled by both talent and circumstance. And while both men were legends, only one could exploit this alignment of timing, influence, and structural loophole to remain virtually untouchable. By understanding these moments, the careful navigation of rules, the subtle protection of class structure, and the quiet power of corporate backing, we see how Don Prudhomme escaped the fate that might have slowed even the greatest of drivers. And now, as we reach the final reveal, the story of the snake becomes not just about speed, but about how the hidden architecture of NHRA racing shaped one legend's untouchable path. The hidden legacy, how the snake escaped Grumpy's fate. When you step back and look at the careers of these two legends, the difference is striking. Grumpy Jenkins, relentless, brilliant, and innovative, constantly fought the rules he helped inspire. Every victory came with a price: weight penalties, technical adjustments, and a relentless struggle against the system itself. The NHRA was watching, measuring, adjusting, and ensuring that his genius could never completely run unchecked. Every race was a duel not just with other drivers, but with the rulebook itself. Don Prudhomme, on the other hand, seemed almost untouchable. And now we understand why. It wasn't luck, nor merely skill behind the wheel. It was a combination of timing, class structure, and corporate leverage. His dominance unfolded in funny car and top fuel, classes where the NHRA's focus was on safety, spectacle, and crowd engagement, not the precise calibration of every part. His machines could push boundaries without triggering the same level of scrutiny. Every sponsor, every manufacturer, every media appearance reinforced his untouchable status, creating a buffer that Jenkins never had. The structural loophole was subtle but undeniable. The snake was racing in a parallel reality within the same sport, one that allowed him to innovate, experiment, and dominate without the constant interference faced by the engineer-driven pro-stock world. NHRA rules were always present, but their enforcement was uneven, shaped by class, by influence, and by the practical need to protect the star power that kept drag racing in the public eye. In essence, Prudhomme's path was shielded by the invisible architecture of the sport. Where Jenkins had to fight every gram, every cubic inch, the snake could focus on racing, winning, and expanding his legend. And this is the secret reason why one legend was constantly challenged, while the other seemed to glide past the storm. It was not a question of fairness, nor a question of cheating. It was a systemic alignment of skill, timing, and influence that few could replicate. Today, when fans look back at that golden era, they see two icons. One changed the engineering of pro stock forever. The other became a superstar untouchable in his class. Both defined drag racing history, but only one leveraged the hidden rules of the system to ensure that his dominance remained untarnished. And that is the untold story of how Don, the snake, Prudhomme escaped Grumpy Jenkins' legal fate, not through luck, but through the subtle, invisible forces that shaped the very structure of drag racing itself. As the engines cooled and the crowds dispersed, the story of the 1970s NHRA era became more than just a record of wins and losses. It was a tale of strategy, structure, and invisible advantage. Grumpy Jenkins may have been the ultimate engineer, the man who reshaped pro stock with his ingenuity, but every step he took was scrutinized, measured, and sometimes penalized. He fought not just competitors, but a system designed to maintain balance, a system that seemed to punish brilliance as much as it rewarded speed. Don Prudhomme, meanwhile, navigated a parallel track, one where the very rules that constrained others could not hold him back. His victories weren't just the result of talent or courage behind the wheel. They were the product of perfect timing, class structure, and political leverage. Corporate sponsors, media attention, and the NHRA's need to protect the star power of drag racing created a shield around him, invisible to most fans, but decisive in defining his legacy. And that is the remarkable lesson of this era. Success in motorsport isn't always measured by horsepower alone. Sometimes, it's about where you stand within the structure of the game, how you navigate the rules, and how you leverage every subtle advantage the system allows. Prudhomme's untouchable path reminds us that the line between genius and dominance is often shaped as much by context as by skill. For those who lived through it, the rivalry between Grumpy Jenkins and the Snake wasn't just about cars, it was a study in contrast. One fought the rulebook and became a legend of engineering. The other raced almost untouched and became a legend of strategy and timing. Both changed drag racing forever, but in ways that reveal the invisible forces shaping sport, power, and legacy. As you look back at the roaring engines and blazing quarter-miles, remember this. History often remembers the victors, the speed demons, the champions, but sometimes the real story lies in the hidden rules that decided who could stay untouchable and who had to fight for every inch. And that, in the quiet corners of NHRA history, is how Don, the Snake, Prudhomme escaped Grumpy Jenkins' fate, leaving us with one of the most fascinating stories of strategy, speed, and silent advantage in drag racing history. As the checkered flags waved and the crowds cheered in the 1970s, the story of drag racing was about more than just who crossed the finish line first. It was a story of rules, influence, and the invisible forces shaping victory. Grumpy Jenkins' brilliance forced NHRA to constantly adjust its rulebook, proving that innovation could be both a blessing and a curse. Every engine tweak, every lightweight modification was scrutinized, penalized, and debated. His genius didn't just win races, it challenged the system itself. Don Prudhomme, on the other hand, navigated a different path. The Snake's dominance was never just about his reaction times or his ability to push a car down the strip. It was about reading the landscape, understanding the subtle advantages of class structure, and leveraging the corporate and political forces surrounding him. The funny car and top fuel classes offered him a protective buffer, a structural advantage built into the very architecture of NHRA racing. Where Jenkins had to fight rules, Prudhomme could focus purely on speed and strategy. This contrast offers a powerful lesson for anyone watching. In motorsport, as in life, talent alone is rarely enough. Context, timing, influence, and understanding the system often make the difference between a legacy of struggle and a legend of dominance. Prudhomme didn't cheat. He didn't exploit loopholes in a conventional sense. He understood the invisible game, the delicate balance of rules, class structure, and influence, and played it flawlessly. And here's the twist that makes this story unforgettable. Both men are legends. Both reshaped drag racing. Jenkins revolutionized engineering in pro stock, while Prudhomme became a superstar untouchable in his class. But only one had the invisible shield of structural advantage, proving that sometimes the greatest victories aren't just won on the track, they're shaped by the rules and systems around us. So, the next time you watch footage of the Snake blazing down the strip, remember, what looks like pure speed is often a combination of talent and invisible strategy. Grumpy fought the rules. Prudhomme raced past them. And that, in the annals of drag racing history, is a story that still fascinates fans to this day. Now it's your turn. Which legend do you think had the toughest battle, Grumpy Jenkins or Don Prudhomme? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because understanding their stories is understanding the hidden chessboard of drag racing itself. As the engines cooled and the crowds left the drag strips, the story of Grumpy Jenkins and Don Prudhomme remained etched in history, not just as a tale of speed, but as a study in how rules, influence, and timing shape greatness. Jenkins, the brilliant engineer, constantly pushed the boundaries of pro stock, redefining what a car could do, but he was always fighting the system itself. Every innovation brought scrutiny, every success a new set of limitations. His genius was undeniable, yet the rules he challenged often seemed to shadow his every move. Prudhomme, in contrast, seemed almost untouchable. The Snake raced in a world where the rules, class structure, and corporate backing created a protective shield. He could innovate without fear of crippling penalties, dominate without the constant interference that Jenkins faced, and build a legend that remains unmatched in funny car and top fuel history. His advantage wasn't cheating, it was strategy, the kind you can't see on a timing sheet, the kind that exists quietly in the architecture of the sport. And that is the lesson for anyone watching today. The greatest victories are rarely about raw speed alone. Talent, yes, But context, strategy, and understanding the system often make the difference between a fleeting triumph and an untouchable legacy. Prudhomme mastered the invisible game. Jenkins mastered the machine. Both changed drag racing forever. So, the next time you watch footage of these legends tearing down the strip, remember, what looks like pure horsepower is often a combination of brilliance, cunning, and circumstance. One fought the rulebook, the other raced beyond it. And in the end, both left marks that will never fade. If you loved uncovering this hidden chapter of drag racing history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell, because there are countless more stories of speed, strategy, and secrets waiting to be told. And don't forget to comment below, which legend do you think truly mastered the invisible game, Grumpy Jenkins or Don Prudhomme?